we really have to wait. לא נדבר על זה. רגע.
אחרי כל כך הרבה שנים בארץ, אתה עוד מעיז.
לא, אני מלי. קודם כל יצאתי ביום שבת עם הרגשה. Okay.
As you know, we are in a very, very
tense,
extreme situation. And we know by tonight what's going on and very, very tricky situation.
Yeah.
But we should allow it.
We should go back historically to another tricky situation.
Might help us. So, floor is yours. And I have to apologize because I have to be here.
Okay. So, thank you everyone for being here. So, I'm start with the regular reservations. This being a work in progress, okay? But this is really a work in progress. This is the research I'm doing here as the postdoc research, which basically looks at the city of Haifa during and after the 1948 war, trying to explore the way the city constructs or creates a new normalcy after the extreme conditions of war. And what I'm going to talk today is only one part of that. We will basically on the time of the war in Haifa, more or less. So just to begin, I will say why I consider that specific period as a time of extreme condition in the city's life. So basically, within the time of the war, within about 6 months, 5 to 6 months, the city lost almost half of its population. 95% of its Arab Palestinian residents left or driven out by force or been expelled, depends who and when. And when after the war ended, only 33,500 Arab Palestinian residents remained in the city out of 70,000 before the war, which was about half of the population, 70,000. So that's one point. The other is that
how does it correspond to
3,500 or 35,000?
3,500 are 5% out of the 70,000 Palestinians that were.
3,000. You said 30,000.
Okay.
No, 3,000.
Okay.
Another point was the destruction of large areas of the city, especially the downtown area and some other Arab neighborhoods. The city was disconnected from all its main flows and resources, supplies, essential infrastructures as the state was established and the borders had disconnected the state from the region. So rail trains, oil pipelines, all that was disconnected. And in the following years, within just 3 years, there was a large flows of Jewish immigration that came to the city, so that within 3 years the city population doubled itself. So this altogether
doubled itself to 140,000?
Yes, by 1951. So this is the main characteristics of what I consider as the extreme condition of the city at that time. And the research at large looks at how the city came out of that and reorganized itself as a city. But as I said, today we're going to talk about the time of the war, the year 1948. And the main argument of today's talk will be that while commonly in legal theory and political theory, the concept of the state of emergency is understood as a conservative act which aims to preserve an existing political order or legal order by the suspension of law and then reinstating it. So I would argue that in this case, in order to understand it, we need to think about this state of emergency as a transforming act, which enables the creation of a new order. In this case, a new urban and political order. So if we go into the details of the state of emergency at that time, so the war, the fighting in the city lasted from December 47 to April 48, following the UN decision of the partition plan. Started like all over the country right after that, and ended at 21st, 22nd of April, as the city was conquered by the Jewish forces, the Haganah. And during that time, which was declared by the local leadership as a state of emergency, there evolved a local committee, which was named the Status Committee, or the Situation Committee, ועדת המצב, which was, it came into power. It was a kind of a nominated committee with representatives of all the different parties, different neighborhoods, different organizations in the city. The local civil leadership. And the committee was called for the resident to, its main task was to maintain everyday life while there is still fighting around the city.
The British also were still there.
Yes, I will say something about that. So at the time it was still under British mandate. The British left at the end of June 48, was the last place where they left from. And this status committee, which was organized basically in October 1947 by the appointment of local leadership, but by the call of the national Jewish leadership, who at that time preparing for the war and preparing for the transformation following the partition plan, formed this kind of committees around the country, and also there was a central national status committee. But this committee had also a history in the city because it formed and deformed a few times earlier during different occasions, like the 1929 riots, and during the Arab rebellion in the 30s, and during the World War II. And now it reformed itself again as the situation was considered a state of emergency. And the main task of the committee was to maintain normal everyday life in the city.
Comprising only of Jews, the committee?
Yes, the committee was comprised only of Jews. There were at different times a similar committee formed by the Palestinian population. And it's not surprising because although the city was considered a mixed city formally by the British government, and it had a joint shared municipality of Jews and Arabs, populations were pretty much separated in most aspects of life, both especially in the city, different neighborhoods, and also in modes of organization.
Except that they were called Arabs and not Palestinians.
Yes, some of them. There was a Palestine newspaper.
Yeah, the use of concept and definition was definitely different.
Yes.
The look with the eyes of 2019 on something that happened on 48.
But still, there was, since the beginning of the 20th century, there was an evolving national Palestinian consciousness rising up.
Documents from the period talk about Haifa's Arabs.
Yeah. And Jewish, not
And
Israeli, Arab and Jewish or Hebrew
Yeah.
population. But there was as I said, a newspaper called Palestine was published in Haifa, so it was.
My birth certificate says I was born in Palestine, Tel Aviv, Palestine.
So it was
Palestinian.
It was a concept of the time. So the two populations were pretty much separated in most aspects of life, but still there were connections. There were some neighborhoods were integrated or mixed neighborhoods, mostly in the downtown area. So it's not a surprise that this status committee was of Jews only, and was commissioned of the daily life of the Jews, the Jewish population. So although this committee gained legitimacy from both the national leadership and the local Jewish population, and although it had this historical precedence for its operation, the committee didn't have full sovereignty, and it had, in a way, to compete with other authorities on its sovereignty in the city, on its authority. So if we look at this is one of the initial statements when they started when they just initiated their activities. So they called the population to be disciplined and to follow their orders and to maintain pretty much everyday life. At that time, there were fighting going on in different areas of the city, which was conducted by the Haganah, but all other aspects were under the responsibility of the committee, and it had many different aspects to its.
Was it written in Hebrew?
Yes, this is all translated from Hebrew.
Okay. So it was obligated, right? Obedience is obligated.
Yes.
Because obliged means like suggested.
Okay, obligated.
Just wanted to
Burial dead is innovative.
So what the committee was responsible of is was taking care of refugees and housing issues they had. Refugees meaning Jewish residents that had to move or that moved out of the neighborhoods where fighting was going on, where the clashes were going on between neighborhoods. So refugees were moved out of their houses and were housed in all different places like schools, hotels, camps. They took responsibility for fortifications of different houses and places, burial, treatment of casualties, taking care of economic issues, of rationing of different commodities and supplies. They tried to initiate a local police. They conducted a census at the time. So they took care of all aspects of civic life, and also enforce some taxes to be able to operate. So this is all managed by them. But as I said...
סליחה, יש לי רק שאלה, מה מצב העירייה היה?
אוקיי.
כי היה ראש עיר ערבי.
The municipality.
Municipality.
At the time, the mayor was Jewish, was Shabtai Levi. He was the mayor since 1940. But the municipality was combined of both Jews and Arabs.
Okay.
And as I said before, this is a case of a contested sovereignty, because at the time, first they had these issues with the municipality, and the position of the status committee said that they can't trust the municipality, which is obligated to take care of both communities and is operating under the British mandate rules. So they didn't trust them. So they said that they had to take care of all kinds of issues that specifically were for the Jewish population. So this was on the one side, they had like contested sovereignty with the municipality, who's in charge of what. And on the other side, they had the military leadership, basically the Haganah, who was in the city, who were conducting the fighting and saw themselves as a kind of ruler of the city and sovereign of the
So
city.
the Jewish residents pay taxes both to the municipality and to the status committee?
The issue of taxes and the funding is quite complicated, but for years the Jewish population paid taxes also to the what was called the community committee.
Mhm.
So they were paying taxes for them,
ועד קהילה?
ועד הקהילה. And the status committee was operating in cooperation with the ועד הקהילה. But on top of that, they were trying to put on more taxes, like for housing and for building. It didn't always work out because they didn't have really they couldn't enforce it. But they tried to raise money by this way. So on the other hand, they had this contested sovereignty with the Haganah, and we can see here, this is the declaration of the district commander of the Haganah on the day after the end of the fighting in the city, which he declared himself as the lawful Hebrew, he says Ivri, rule, yes, and will operate by the orders of supreme institutions. And in a way, he kind of declared that all the city is now under military rule, both Arabs and Jewish populations, which the status committee didn't really like. So they declared 2 days after that they are the sovereigns of the city and that they are in charge of all city life, adding also that all handling with the remaining of the Arab population had to be consulted with them and not just by the military governor. And they also approached Ben Gurion at the time, asking him to intervene and to set the boundaries between the military and the civic leadership. And he came to the city and he sent Golden Meyerson to sort things out. And in a way, it was sorted that the status committee kept their sovereignty of the civic issues and the Haganah kept their sovereignty of the military issues, but these things all the time got mixed and it was an ongoing
contest
of sovereignty. So
such a story was also characterizing other cities in Israel. It's the tension between the military and the pre-military,
Right.
and the
pre-civil.
Yeah.
it's
Worth checking.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But they didn't consider themselves as pre-civil because they were
Right.
they
I
were
think in
the
Tel Aviv
civil
they did.
leadership. I don't
or
know.
something similar in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv Yafo.
So, if we understand this as a situation where the sovereignty is contested between at least three parts, the municipality, the Haganah, the status committee, and the British government, which is still here in the city, although avoiding interfering in these issues. So this is something we have to understand when we think about this situation as a state of emergency, as it is commonly understood. Because if we understand the state of emergency as something that is declared by the sovereign, and over here we have a situation where it was declared by contested sovereigns. So this is the first notion that we have to maybe reconsider this, the concept of state of emergency and how it operates in this case. So as I said before, so following that, I would like to think anew this concept as a state of emergency, and not as a temporal state in which law is suspended, but more as a constituent moment of creation of a new order. And just a theoretical remark about this, in this understanding, I refer to Walter Benjamin's distinction when in his the way he conceptualized the constituent power in his text, Critique of Violence from 1921, where he makes a distinction between law-making and law-preserving violence. And this distinction relates to the distinction between constituent power and constituted power. So according to him, a constituent power designates the creative power to set in place a legal and political order from scratch, a new one, while having no limits or legal constraints on its capacity to define the new created order. And constituted power refers to the power thus created. That is, constituted power operates according to this order that was created, and constituted power has the power to create a new order. So for Benjamin, both powers are tainted by unavoidable relations to violence, whether it is a destructive violence involved in the creation of the lawmaking, or as an oppressive violence which is necessary to sustain power and to preserve law. So there are the two options are bound together in a dialectic way and reveal the complex relation between law, power, and violence. But the difference between the two is that constituent power holds its own authority and power to create new forms of life, while constituent power is authorized by that creation, and is about administrating life. And I would like to say that in this case, we have a stated emergency which operates as a constituent moment. That is, what might have initially started as a way to maintain the everyday life and sustain life, evolved into an opportunity to create a new political and legal order in and through the city. And I would like to exemplify that in two ways, two aspects of the city life at the time. One will be the downtown and the way the status committee deals with the downtown area of the city, and the other is the way the Arab abandoned or the illicit property was treated at the time. So if we look at the cities at the downtown, and I would like to call that, or to conceptualize that, as a movement from sustainment to destruction. So, as I said before, the city's downtown was the main area where Jews and Arabs were living together, or encountering each other, or had normal everyday life. It was the commercial center, the administrative center, was the center of the city, the historical center also. And it was also, pretty much because of that, it was also the main scene of fighting during those 5 months of fighting in the city. So, because of that, the situation in the downtown got worse and worse, and many people started to leave it, to abandon the area, and move their businesses and homes and other houses wherever they could to other neighborhoods. So already during the war, the status committee declared the situation in the abandoned downtown as a state of emergency, which required special means to handle with. So this is one of the earlier declaration, and they said they were trying to keep all residents and the Jewish population in the downtown area. They were pressing people not to abandon the area, not to move from there, to keep their businesses working, to maintain everyday life as it used to be. They had some orders of specific hours that the shops and workshop and factory should be operating in order to maintain regular life there. They were pressing the transportation companies to keep on the connection between the different neighborhoods. So they were securing the transportation in order for that to go on. And this was going on all through the war, forbidding people from moving out of them.
When you say people, you mean Jewish people?
They were referring to the Jews.
Okay, so they weren't.
They were referring only to Jewish population. I forgot to say at the beginning, but that was before you came. No, you didn't miss it because I didn't say it. That in all this research, I'm looking only at or mostly at the Jewish population, because there were and are still other researches done on Palestinian population, and I'm focusing on the Jewish. But in any case, the State Committee was referring only was approaching only Jewish population, Palestinian population. So they were calling the Jewish population to stay there, and Jewish companies and all kinds of offices. And that was going all along the time of the fighting until the end of April. But as the fighting ceased, terminated, there was starting to be raised some voices within the leadership, within the Status Committee, with the different authorities that were calling for the destruction of the area. The center of the downtown was what was called the old city of Haifa, which was actually called the new city of Haifa, but it was a new city from the mid-18th century. But at that time, it was already the old city. It was a kind of, as you probably imagine, any old city area, like Jerusalem or Akka. And there were starting to be voices raised to demolish this area in order to enable a new modern planning and modern urban space to be developed instead of the old city. This quote is taken from a plan that was made at the time. It's not really clear who made the plan, but it's someone that no doubt was well informed with the city planning situation and the city conditions, probably someone from the Status Committee. And apart from saying that this exodus of the Arab population is an opportunity to redevelop the city as a modern city, it also details a long list of houses that should be demolished and places that should be erased in order to enable a modern planning and development. And these were some of the voices raised in the Status Committee also, and it was also raised brought before different officials, national authorities, including Ben-Gurion. And eventually these ideas were adopted, and by August 1948, vast parts of the city's downtowns were demolished and prepared for new development or redevelopment. This was made by the army, because the municipality denied they didn't want to take responsibility for that. They said it will be problematic legal-wise and economic wise. So they denied, they didn't accept doing that. So Ben Gurion ordered the army to do that. And by the summer of 48, hundreds of houses throughout the downtown area were demolished.
But you jumped to July. Meanwhile,
From
the state
May.
of the state of Israel was established, so sovereignty was settled, right?
Not in an instance. As I will say in a few minutes, so the status committee was operating until around July, August 1948. Because at that time, between May and July, August, so many of its activities were taken by the new established national authorities. But they were still operating along that time. And even after that, getting back to their more everyday responsibilities that they had before the state was established. So it didn't change on May.
Yeah, okay. But the status committee was dissolved, or it dissolved itself?
It dissolved itself by the summer.
Dissolved itself.
Yeah. But at different phases, because different parts of its responsibilities were turned over to different authorities as they came up. So it was a process. But by the summer they were
And
kind of
elections
dissolved.
to the municipality took place together with the general elections.
Sure. But the municipality was all the time still ongoing, even all that time. But if you look at the municipality record, you can see that for some time only the Jewish members are arriving to the
Active.
are active, and then there are some Arab representatives. So, but the municipality was all the time going on. I didn't mention that before, but for instance, when the British left, so they left most of the essential facilities to the municipality. Like the seaport was transferred to the municipality, and the taboo offices was transferred to the municipality, taxes, stuff like that. So this is one of the places where there was sovereignty was contested between status committee and the municipality, because they said we have to accept that this is now in the hands of the municipality, but we have to make sure that the municipality has a more Jewish content. That's what they said. So the municipality was all the time around, but
And do you have any evidence of what the mayor said, declared, intended, exchanges between him and the status committee?
The mayor and other Jewish representatives of the municipality were part of the status committee.
Yeah.
Well,
The mayor was part of the status committee.
in a way, it wasn't part of the.
So he was no longer competing?
It's not just competing; it's competing and collaborating all the time. So
And were other people from the municipal council on the steering?
the Jewish members of municipal council were part of the status committee, not part of its more inner council, part of the large committee. The committee was between 50 and 100 people at times, so it was a large committee, but it was a more narrow council. So he was part of it, but there were all kinds of representatives of different parties, different organizations. So they had all kinds of ideas and positions there. It wasn't one position in there.
The mayor was
Shabtai
Levi until when?
I think until the elections, which I don't remember when beginning of the 50s.
And then Abba Hushi.
Abba Hushi was also part of the status committee. So at that time, he was the head of the workers' council. Okay, so So as we can see, the way the city downtown was handled was transformed from beginning an attempt to sustain everyday life and evolved into the destruction of the area in order to make place for a new urban order, urban planning, urban development. And when we look at the second theme about what was called the Rechush Natush, abandoned Arab property at the time. So here again, I would like to consider it as a process transformation from preservation to confiscation. So when at the beginning, already already in May, even before the state was established, but after the fighting was finished in the city. So the issue of how to handle this property was debated and discussed and was part of what was contested between the status committee and the Haganah. All parties had different ideas what should be done with this property. All parties wanted to be responsible for this for the property. Some places were taken by the Haganah, some other places were taken by the status committee. And this was already happening before there was any law or legislation or anything that was ordering or supposed to organize the way this property should have been dealt with. So at the beginning, we can see that the status committee are saying that it's obligated to put life back on track, also in the Arab neighborhoods, to avoid any damage or any interference with the well-being and property of the Arabs. They say that confiscation of businesses, of stores, of shops, of property should be done with the presence of its owners as much as it can, or with the presence of representatives of the Arab community where the owners are absent. But this also is changed as we go on with time. And as I said before, one of the main tasks of the status committee was the rehousing of refugees. And once the fighting ceased, so one of the opportunities they had to rehouse these refugees was using these Arab abandoned properties. So they were used for housing for these refugees. It was also used for housing for new Jewish immigrants coming to the city, arriving at the city. So all this was taking place before the Declaration of Independence. And even at the same time, the Status Committee started to attempted to set kind of quasi-legal guidelines of how to use these properties by Jewish inhabitants. So it set guidelines of what should be done with rent of Jewish residents, or who is going to be in charge of these properties and administrate them and manage them. They even designated duties such as a custodian of abandoned property, but on a local level, kind of a custodian appointed by the status committee. So they were setting these guidelines, legal guidelines, and kept on using and confiscating houses and allocating them. And during the way they handled it, they were also, as you can see in this part of the committee discussion, they were considering this housing issue, or this as an opportunity to think about the development and determining of the way the city should evolve. They were considered not just as a way of making substitute for or housing for on a personal level, but thinking of it as a municipal asset to be used in the development of the city. All these were taking part during this time, and in a way it was creating the precedents of the regulation and laws that will be legislated in the following months and years, such as the emergency ordinance for capture of land property and later the absentees property law, which in many ways followed the guidelines that were already set in the local municipal level. So again, we can see that on this issue, what started as an attempt to preserve the situation and to maintain life in these neighborhoods turned to be a way to confiscate and to appropriate these properties and to use them in the new development in the city.
Ronnen, you mentioned the ordinance. Did you mean emergency regulation issued by the government, or
Later on in 48.
so this is the way the government chose to deal with the Arab property, abandoned property? Like first
In a
wasn't
similar way. What do you mean?
it wasn't primary legislation, law of the Knesset,
No.
but it
It
emergency regulation.
It was first an emergency regulation
Okay.
in 48, and then was the second phase of it was kind of a emergency law, I think they call it.
Decree.
Okay. And only, which is in Hebrew, and only
זה
in,
תקנות חירום?
no, the first was the
תקנות
חירום,
חירום.
and then there was a kind of a legislation, and only in 1950 was the legislation of the absentees property law and the development authority, as a style. So this was only in 1950, but the management of the property was going on from the beginning, from May 48. So, as I was saying, by the summer of 48, most of the activities had been terminated, of the status committee had been terminated, and it kind of slowly dissolved itself. And most of the duties and responsibilities were taken by different national authorities of housing and development and economic authorities. But I would argue that the foundation of the new political and legal order in the city and beyond were already set at this time. A new order that drew new boundaries in the city, new boundaries the residents and citizens of the city, redefining the city as a Jewish city in a Jewish state, and giving priority for Jews over Palestinians, Arabs, in all aspects of urban life.
So when there was a slide before that said that there was confiscation of the Arabs who remained. So of the 3,500 Arabs that remained in Haifa, were their houses also confiscated, or just businesses? And how did they differentiate between that and the absentee?
They did not.
In the beginning, quite within
In the beginning, it looked like they did, like the first quotes. Like there were a couple of days.
It was complicated, and they had all kind of regulation how to use property. Like they were using all kinds of things. I mean, first they were using like commodities, stores, in shops, and they were allocating to the population, to the Jewish population, because they said this is something we need to use, or else it will damage. And they were allocating stores when they try to revitalize the downtown area, so they gave abandoned shops and stores to Jewish businesses. But regarding houses, so what followed very quickly was the Arab population that remained in the city was concentrated
Yeah.
to Wadi Nisnas.
Right.
So they had abandoned properties and
Right.
houses of Arabs that were absentees and also Arabs that were
That were
present
there.
in the city.
And
So
beyond
that's
that,
what it was about.
there was plenty of biza of
Yeah.
Arab property, so
Mhm.
it's beyond
Yeah.
any legal or status committee orders.
Yeah, I didn't mention that one of the conflicts between the Status Committee and the Haganah was that at the beginning, the Status Committee was accusing the Haganah of Biza and Shalal, and, taking.
Respected citizens of Haifa took part in it, so
Yeah, I'm sure.
it's
But
not
that,
generally the Haganah's.
I know that was one of the issues that they were
Yeah.
arguing that the Haganah is not responsible enough to
Prevent those
to prevent
kind
these
of
things from
things.
happening. And they said it should be done in an organized manner. Not,
Yeah.
What about the plan to destruct most of downtown?
This was
Executed?
executed.
What area are we talking about?
Area you don't see.
Where exactly?
Wadi Salim.
No, the old city was, where Paris Square is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the western gate of the old city. That was Hamra Square. That was the Jaffa gate of the old city.
Okay. But there are old houses
No.
in the area of.
There are some.
On the
Some.
sides, but not in the center.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
this
that was the western gate,
Western gate?
and the eastern gate was more or less where the tower is now.
נשאר המסגד.
There is a small mosque there.
The mosque was in the center,
The big mosque, the Jeremy,
the one that's still there.
Jeremy mosque it was more or less in the center,
Mhm.
and there's a small mosque by the tower.
The rocket tower.
So that was more or less the eastern gate, and all that area was now a big parking lot, and the tower, and the rocket tower, and the Tzim building. That's where the old city was, and the courthouse.
Mhm.
Also,
So between there and Wadi Salim, basically.
Yeah.
Wadi Nisnas and Wadi Salim.
more or less.
More or less.
That was the old city, or the new Haifa, as it was called before that.
What about Haifa Atika? Haifa Atika remained as it was, or
Not anymore, but Haifa Atika was the old city at the
Yeah.
time,
okay?
and it was kind of abandoned at the mid 18th century,
Mhm.
and then was the establishment of the new Haifa, which became
So
what
it was not inhabited.
So it was,
No.
then
was
it
a-
wasn't inhabited?
Then it was, but it was kind of a small village,
Uh-huh.
but the center of the city was relocated where Omar established a new city, which became later called
But
the old city.
it's actually a very small area between Peltolis and.
It was, It started as a small fortified city. It was had a fortified wall around it. But by 48, there were already plenty new neighborhoods outside the old city, like Wadi Salim, Khalis, Wadi Misnas.
I don't know how dense it was. It could be very
It
dense,
was very dense.
small but dense.
Even at the time, it was very
Yeah.
dense. At the beginning, at the 20s, most of the Jewish population also lived in that area before they were starting to establish the new neighborhoods. This was the inhabited areas, part of the city. So that's it.
Why, it's a work in progress, so where are you going with it?
I think one way I want to try to develop is to be more precise and detailed about the way this legal way of treating the abandoned property evolved from practices to legislation, and the way these practices became the basis for the law.
So when was the status committee disbanded?
There's, it depends. Like the housing committee, which was one of its main tasks, at the end of June, it was replaced by officially it was replaced by a national housing committee. So that was one of the major things they were responsible of, and that was not the responsibility anymore. But there are still, you can still see there still meetings and things.
So when the national committees were established, was there local representation?
Yes. Some of it was another dispute between the local leadership and the national leadership, because at the beginning the national leadership, and they made a national committee, they had a housing committee, and they had representatives in different cities. But the local leadership was arguing that they can't do that without local knowledge and local representatives. So they did get into this local committee. I mean, a local branch of the national committee.
So did that happen quickly? I mean,
Through that summer.
that's some,
Yeah.
and so is the local from the municipality or the steering
Not the municipality.
committee?
Part of the
or
status
it was
committee.
part of the status committee?
Can you say something about the sources you're using for this research?
Up to now, it's mostly archival sources.
Memoirs?
Found not yet. So it's mostly from the
People
archives.
from that generations left, even the Arab one, left memoirs that I know about. And with a lot of small details and things
That were published?
that were published. I shall send Teva a few of them. Did you find any problem to get to some kind of archives that were not permitted to publicize?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I found there are some file. Most of the resources up to now from the city archive. So you have some files which are
secret.
Parts of the files classified.
Okay.
Just part of the files are classified, but they say it's mainly because of the issues of privacy.
Okay.
And stuff like that, which I hope I can into.
Okay.
But I was also in the Haganah archive and the IDF archive, so they...
Probably the ארכיון המוסדות הציוניים will have a lot of material concerning Haifa.
Yes.
The actual Zashi Kimona is very hard to find documents, but I've heard from other people who are looking for it.
The operation of the destruction.
Yeah, the 3 months where they.
Yeah.
So a lot of that is still.
Easily classified.
I think so. I mean, it's hard to get anything out of the Gitach.
There's an interesting headline, which I haven't read the article, that was just when I was leaving Haaretz today, about they declassifying the archive.
1966.
Yeah.
It's just one file.
Just one large
File.
file.
One large file.
So I said, I only read I kept it. For,
A
when I come back, I
revolution.
only read
One
the,
large file,
A
which
true
took
revolution.
them, I think,
One
2 years
file.
okay.
to unclassify.
I was more hopeful, but I'm a hopeful.
It's with black marks all over, or it's
No, I think
Right.
they have it open now, but it was after struggling for 2 years.
And it's not really there's nothing shocking in there. So we're still waiting for the shocking one. If I can, first of all, thank you. This was a lot of this intrigue between the different voices in Haifa.
Yeah.
I had no clue about. And you were talking about using these temporary and then legislating. So I'm wondering, really, the contextual other cities. So it wasn't just Haifa that had this. It would be interesting to explore the relationship between them and then each one with the local Arab. So there's a lot of contextualizing that I think
Yeah.
will lead to amazing things. And I'm a little confused about your theoretical assertion about conservation and destruction, because if you look at it from a Jewish point of view, it's all conservation. It's the destruction of the Arab parts, but telling Jews to stay is conserving the Jewish, and then telling Jews to come and take someone else on someone else's destruction is still
You
conservation
mean
of their Jewish
difference
perspective.
in narratives?
Yeah.
Basically, you're talking about narratives.
So
Point
the
of view.
construction
Yeah.
and destruction, it
Yeah.
depends what you
The
have
framing, yeah.
of the city maybe, but from their point of view, they're very consistent.
I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure. Because I think that the way those people of the status committee, being residents of the city for a long time, being part of the city, I think they had a different view of the city and different conception of the city at the beginning than they had at the end.
Mm.
I don't think they regarded the city as a Jewish city from the beginning. So in a way, their lives, their everyday life, and the way they understood the city when they started this process, when this process was initiated, I think they did regard it as a kind of a mixed city or a city of mixed population. And you can see it in different places when they're talking about how to treat like in the beginning, some of them say, please stay here. Some of them say, there should be opportunity for the Arabs to come back. It changes within a few months.
The same people?
Same people
Okay.
say that,
So,
and then they can, after a few months, they say, now it's obvious that all Arabs are enemies. So it's not so, if they want to come back, it's not so granted. We have to consider the security issues too. So I think it changed. It's not, and I think it has to do with what I was trying to say in the middle, that they don't, the way they start to act is not as sovereigns. So they don't have this power to maintain what they. It's not. They're not really the sovereign in the city to begin with. They do become part of the sovereign of the Jewish sovereignty. But that's not how they started.
So the members of this committee end up in what jobs? When this committee is, do they end up in the municipality, in the government level, in the army?
Depends. Some of them. But Abba Hushi,
So he was part of.
he was part of the committee.
Mhm.
I checked in 51 as well.
The elections,
Yeah,
He was not one?
he was voted in 50.
Yeah.
51 state.
but he was part of the committee. He was all the time. He had good connection with Ben Gurion and Mapai, so
Of course.
I think what I still have to go into that. That maybe part of what I still have to is exactly this differentiation between the status committee, because it was the Jewish community in the city was very heterogeneous politically, and so some of them I think, became part of the new establishment, and some didn't because they were part of the position at the time. So
When did Shabtai Levy become the mayor? I mean, when was the mayor? When was there an Arab mayor, and then when did Levy be elected?
Levy was the deputy mayor
Deputy.
of Hassan Shukri,
Hassan Shukri.
Okay.
and he was elected mayor in 1940. But they were kind of they were running together. I mean, they were running as the same
As a
party.
team.
Okay, they were cooperating.
You know what happened to Hassan Shukri himself?
I can tell you because I know the family very well. Hassan Shukri's wife was a very good friend of my mother. My mother was born in Haifa, and
She's still alive.
my mother is 102.
So I need
Yeah. And I have roots in Haifa. Anyhow, she and her sister were very good friends of my mother when she was young. And Hassan Shukri was present in my mother's wedding. Hassan Shukri was very liked by the Jewish population in Haifa. And he fled to Lebanon without his wife. I don't remember the year.
Without his wife.
Without his wife and two daughters, they remained here. The two daughters are citizens and residents of Haifa. They married, so they have different names, but both daughters are living here in Haifa.
He had a son, he had
To the best of my knowledge, she had only two daughters. This is what I know.
Sohel Shukri,
There is no Shukri
I'm
anymore.
sorry, he forgot to visit us when we were
Raya, one of his daughters called herself for years Raya Shukri, but not anymore.
Why did he flee?
I don't know, but I think there was something about a blame for corruption or something like that. I think he was clean, but the period was so unstable that he simply
I think
chose.
you're talking about Sohel. He's the one who had two daughters. He's the one who was corrupt. He sold all the waqf properties that he could.
You are right. I'm
He's the one
talking
who
about
fled.
Sohel, not Hassan.
Hassan
I'm
Shukri did
talking
not
about Sohel.
flee.
You are right.
Sorry. He had
I
two daughters.
apologize. Yes.
No.
So that's the son of Hassan Shukri?
Yeah, Sohel.
With
He
the
was very
Sohel. Yes.
much into himself.
So
Sorry.
Hassan Shukri was already
Yeah, I
probably
think he
not.
died.
He
but
died
then
before.
It
Yeah.
was a different story.
Different story.
Yeah.
Erase it.
Yeah.
It's son.
No, it's part of the same story, but
It's the
different
same story.
It's a
generation.
different generation.
But listen, I wanted to ask you something more serious and definitely not fitting for these hours of the day. How do you define emergency situation? Just think about it, because in many of the current definitions of emergencies, there are some elements that you will not find in this situation, and vice versa. So I wonder, we use emergency in so many different ways that it might be very helpful to define for your own work what are the components of emergency. And I think that will be wonderful theoretical contribution.
Don't worry, for
To
the
the topic.
last 7 years, we've been, I mean, the whole
You've
group
been
of
trying
us
to do
have
that.
been discussing this, so clearly not
You
one
You want me
definition.
to drop the suggestion? Or?
No, I'm just saying that
Okay.
it's not something that's so,
Okay.
I think
You know what is good about advices. You can take it or leave it. It's,
what I was trying to do is to add one component
Yeah,
Wonderful.
to the way you understand.
till you look at it.
Very
That's
good.
how, when we
Very
accepted
good.
it, that's how we.
Very good.
From a legal point of view, we have.
Yes. So you have easy life, yeah, from the legal point of view.
And even
Yeah.
now, we're expanding what an emergency is.
Yeah.
The rule of law itself can be an emergency or positive.
Nadav is actually organizing a big conference next month on the fact that it's 71
participation.
years state of
The
emergency.
30th of June.
Yeah. But you agree that there are
The 13th of
other components
Sunday, 30th.
to emergency. You will agree.
That's what I
There are
think.
some.
I think it's a fascinating work. When you present it, I think it will be great to have also visual
Yeah.
maps. You know, the
Right.
areas.
Right.
If there are pictures of the old city
Before and after
before
destruction.
it
Yeah.
became
I was also,
Yeah.
Listen,
Uh,
I think I shall be able to provide you some old pictures of Haifa. We
come
have
out
it
as a-
in
I think
family
that would make
albums.
a real,
And with regard to the academic contribution, I join the voices that say you have to put it a little bit in a comparative perspective. So, you can focus on many things, but whether things here in Haifa were very different from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, these exactly
Tveria,
these,
Tzfat.
exactly this, the struggle between the different powers, the municipality, the status committee,
Right.
the army, the British. Actually, there are four
Mhm.
powers. How do they interplay? It can be a very interesting comparative perspective, with, of course, various insights about theoretical structures, how actually a regime arises.
Yeah.
Because
What comforts me, there was a balagan there is balagan today, so there is a continuity.
it's a different kind of balagan.
Yes,
Afraid.
yes, I agree.
But there is
Continuity in
always a
order.
logic and
In the
order to the balagan.
But you can pull it to many directions, and one interesting direction is the relation between the local and the central. Was this influencing afterwards the conception of the relations between local and central? We are a very centralized country. The municipality ordinance was there during the British times already, and it hasn't been changed. So these things are very interesting in kind of more general insights besides the very fascinating story of life.
Yeah, also laws about protected tenancy. That has anything to do with people coming in and, I don't know. When that started, that's another story
It's
of
another complicated story.
expropriation of a different kind.
Yeah.
Courts, the courts operate during this short period that you cover. Who sat in the courts? Judges, Arab judges stayed, or they fled, or many, I don't know, many layers if you can see it. But this is quite easy. Go to the court archive and just check what was.
There is research actually now. People writing a book about the legal, tell you.
Great.
יפה מאוד.
Thank you very much.
תודה רבה.
Thank you.